These non-local automations, sometimes it's a little quicker, sometimes it's a little slower, but it's always frustrating as a delay. And now I should be able to go just about as quick as I'd like. Look at how fast that is. That is ridiculous. When I started using SmartThings many years ago, there was one major gap in the platform, and that was that every time I made an automation, it required the internet to be available for that automation to run. Over the years, this has improved slowly but surely. Now I'm excited to show you how we can get most of our automations running locally. When I say running locally, I of course mean the internet won't be required for your automation to run. However, that is not the only benefit you'll experience, as automations run faster and are far more reliable. So this is something that you want to do so that your smart home works better and the automations themselves feel more natural and more in tune with your life. That's why I'm excited to give you this guide for local automations and what is called the new Edge driver program that you will have on many of your SmartThings hubs already. Hello automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and in order to help you automate your life, I'm going to be focusing on a really important aspect of automation, which is local execution. To start down that path, we have to understand what's required for an automation to be locally executed. The basic components of an automation with SmartThings are as follows. There is the trigger event that starts the routine or automation, and then there is potentially a delay or another function like a precondition. There can be additional conditions for that trigger event to start the automation, and in SmartThings, those can be put in an AND or an OR configuration, which means in the case of AND that all of those things have to exist for the automation to start, whereas in the case of OR, it's just one of those things have to exist for the automation to start. Then you have really any number of actions that can take place. When you look at SmartThings routines, this is on the side of then. This is what you and I like to see because something turns on something or we change a setting. Encompassing all of these pieces is the code that makes this happen. In SmartThings, there are a lot of places that code can be housed. We see routines as the main source of automations today, but there are scenes, there's smart apps, and some of those smart apps are things like WebCore, which can run entirely outside of SmartThings and really just use data to create automation. But when you look at this diagram now, everything you see on the page has to be contained on your SmartThings hub for any automation to run locally. There are a few details that you'll want to understand here, and your device that's being used in automations can be connected locally, or they can be connected through a cloud connection. The older custom device handlers use what's called the Groovy platform, and those are pieces of code that execute on the cloud. So whenever you use a custom device handler, your automation is instantly cloud-based. Some of those little tricky functions inside of your routines are cloud-based too, like a comparative statement. Here's a list of local actions and local conditions that you can use in your routines. Given what I just showed you and told you about how an automation can run locally, I think it's pretty obvious that one of the most important things you can do is to get your devices connected to your SmartThings hub locally in order to get more options for local automation. Today, there are 3 ways I can tell you to do that. The first one is to pick devices that connect locally through the normal add process in the SmartThings app. Things like Philips Hue and many of the basic Zigbee and Z-Wave sensors and end devices like smart plugs, bulbs, and switches will connect locally, and you don't have to think about anything there at all. Today, I think most reviews of sensors and end devices that connect with SmartThings should include something about whether it's locally controllable or not, and I think you'll find most reviews should include that information, at least here on Automate Your Life. But you can find out if something you purchased is connected locally, And this gives us an option to make adjustments. So the first thing you need to do is to head to what is called the Samsung SmartThings IDE, and this is at account.smartthings.com. You're going to click to sign in, and it should prompt you to sign in with your standard SmartThings account. And once you've done that, you're going to head up to devices in what's pretty close to the top left. In here, you have a list of all of your devices that you've connected with Samsung SmartThings. One of the things you're going to notice over on the right hand side is the execution location. It will say local or cloud. And this will tell you if you have a locally connected device or a cloud connected device. What you're probably assuming right now is if it says local in this list, then you have local automations running off of these, but that's actually not the case every time. So here's my closet sensor. You can see that it is a locally connected device. So I'm going to go and click into that, and you can see that its status is online. These are all the details that we have for this device. Down here at the bottom, you're going to see an execution location that does say local, so that's great news. But below that is an in use by. One of them is the smart lighting closet lighting automation that I've set up because it's a motion sensor in there, and I can click and go into that in order to get more details. Down here at the bottom of that automation, it actually says that this is a locally executing automation. So you do get that, but if I go back, you can see that something like if this then that, which we would expect to be a cloud-based automation, it does say that execution is in the cloud. There's one caveat to this, and that is the Edge driver program. I'm going to explain further on in the video how you identify a device that's part of that program, and we're about to talk about how that's so important for local connectivity. But right now, those devices say they're cloud connected due to a bug. So now you can diagnose if your devices are local, but there's still a pretty good gap between this and where our automations are executing, because you saw that difference. So let me go back in here, and I'm going to show you up at the top left a couple of sections that are at least hints to you having something executing in the cloud. Now, anything in the My Smart Apps section here is going to execute in the cloud. I haven't seen an example where it doesn't. If your device is using one of these smart apps or it's being used in one of these, then it's in the cloud. Notice that this is not all of the smart apps you have in the SmartThings application. It's just the ones here. And the same is true for My Device Handlers. There's a lot of different device handlers that I've installed. You might have a smaller list, but anything that you're using from this is executing in the cloud. And I always like to give a good example. So here's the Zooz Q sensor. I've shown this a couple of times on the channel, and it's a Z-Wave sensor. Now, when you connect it the first time, this device connects locally, but I wanted to use one of these device handlers, and you can see that I have the Zooz Q sensor down at the bottom here. Now, when I click into that, all I'm going to see is all of the code that I've installed, and you're now starting to see things like this. Oh, you've set settings that say it'll run locally. It doesn't seem to matter right now, or I can't get any of these device handlers to run locally just yet. And so this says Zooz Q sensor, but I don't have to use this. If I want to take my device back to local, I could. So I'm going to go back to my devices, and then we're going to scroll all the way to the bottom because I have the Zoozy Q sensor. That's what I called mine, and that name is trademarked, by the way. And you can see over here that it says it's cloud connected, and when I click and go into the details, again, we're seeing the execution location is cloud. Now, how did this happen to me, or how did I end up using this device handler? Well, if I hit edit on any of my devices, there's a number of things that we can change about them. So here is the type, and this is really what sets the way that your device works in Samsung SmartThings. And you can see I'm at the bottom of the list, and that's what I'll tell you. Most of your custom device handlers are going to show up at the bottom of this whole list. So if I only wanted to use this as a motion sensor, I could probably just change to Z-Wave motion temp light sensor, but then I'm losing some of those custom features. So I wanted this initially for myself, and I added that device handler, and then I chose it here. If you want to see how to do this kind of a thing, I have tutorials, they're down below. Just to show you what can happen, I've changed it to a Z-Wave motion sensor, and I'm hitting update. We'll see, yes, my execution location has changed to local. Now when I go back into the SmartThings app, I'm not going to have all those fancy settings. I already told you guys that. So, you know, you have to choose at this point whether or not this is what you want. In 2021, I created a video that showed you how to enroll in a beta program called Edge. Because it was a beta program and we're talking about your home, I know many people didn't enroll. That's okay. However, the Edge driver program has now been rolled out to V2, V3, and AOTech hubs all over the world. Your hub has to have a firmware version of 0.038 or higher, and I'll show you how to find that in a moment. But once you have one of those hubs and that firmware version, you're actually on the Edge driver program today. That's because Samsung has now released that program, and it means many more devices that you have in your home can connect locally. And I just talked about those groovy custom device handlers and how they would give you access to special settings or features. That's actually something that is being built into the Edge drivers. So not only will devices that use an Edge driver be connected locally, but you will also have a lot of those specialized settings. Even better than that is we won't just see Zigbee and Z-Wave devices over the long term be connected using Edge drivers. This is because Samsung has been very clear about the fact that even LAN connected products can be locally connected, and that the future Matter standard will use Edge drivers. So I want you to start getting familiar with this process and to start converting devices over to the Edge drivers. And the reason I say that is because there is an eventual end date for the Groovy program and the devices that are still using Groovy drivers. We don't have a final end date yet, but I think it will be sometime late in 2022 or early 2023. So you will have to convert at some point. So there is a date where you will be told you need to convert. So you might as well start now. For now, let me show you how you head down that path and start to work with Edge. We're going to head into the SmartThings hub because we need to check a few things. Up in the top right, once everything has loaded, you'll see the three dots and you'll go into Driver. Inside of Driver, you're going to want to check which drivers have been installed, and you should see a list of pretty basic stuff here that Samsung has now pushed to lots of the hubs with a certain firmware and certain models of the hub that I'll put on screen now. I initially went down to the bottom because I was in the beta program, and that meant that I had all these drivers, and I actually have a bunch of duplicates showing now for having been installed on my hub. So I might have to go through and make some adjustments, but I'm just gonna leave it as is. Down at the bottom, you'll also see these custom Edge drivers, and I'm gonna talk about a little more in the future, but what you should see right now are things like Zigbee motion sensor. This is the base one that Samsung has now given everyone access to. Same with the contact sensors and lots of the Z-Wave and Zigbee ones that you're seeing down here towards the bottom of my list. What you'll want to check if you're not seeing that list showing up, go to the three dots again and go into information. This firmware version has to be over basically 0.038 in order for you to have access to the Edge drivers now. Now the task becomes figuring out which of your devices can use the Edge driver program. I built a list of Edge drivers as it stands today, but that list is going to grow over time, and Samsung has actually said that they won't be posting a full list. I posted that over on my site, and you can download it by following the links below. While you can get that, I won't be updating it that often. So I feel like it would be better to teach you to fish. And there are 3 ways to go fishing for which devices work with Edge drivers. When we looked at your hub in the app and then we went into drivers, we saw which drivers were available to you. These can be lined up with a listing on a page that the SmartThings team has created. The link will be below so you can go and check for updates. Each of these are an Edge driver that you should have available today. When I click on the Zigbee button and then I click on the fingerprints file, we have what looks like code because it is. What you'll see is the device label, the manufacturer, and the model for a number of devices. So this one says it's the Hyman button and the model is SOS-EM. Right below that information is the profile that's used, and because they're using fairly easy conventions to name things, it's easy to tell that this is a single button device. And below that you can see a couple of models of IKEA buttons, including the 5-button remote. What this should tell you about Edge drivers is that it might say Zigbee button, but there could be a lot of different profiles underneath that. If you can't find your device in the list, the next thing you can do is to find a custom Edge driver, just like a custom device handler. The real power behind the SmartThings community is that anyone can now go and create one of these drivers, and so it's actually really easy to find new ones that are available that you can apply to existing devices you have. So when I go into the SmartThings community, you do get a search bar, and you can see that I just searched for Edge driver. There's a number of different ones that instantly came up, but a great example of something I found that I could turn from a cloud connected device to a locally connected device was the Hue motion sensor that I've had in my home for a very long time. Here is the Edge driver. So you can see I just searched for Hue motion Edge driver. So you're going to find this a lot. People are going and they're reworking existing custom device handlers, turning them into Edge drivers, and then giving you a link. And that's actually what's here. I can just simply click this link and it will allow me to accept this Edge driver. In a lot of cases they tell you, and it even said there, use at your own risk, so think about certain things or see what other people are saying in the community. But there, I hit enroll to this, and now I have the available drivers. This allows me to go and install the Hue motion sensor. I now have to follow the process that I'm going to show you for getting a device installed using an Edge driver today. This is a great example here, the Zigbee contact sensor. This is the original one from Samsung. These are included. Things like IKEA products are very often included in here, so you can expect a lot of those devices to be working today. The way you're going to be able to tell really quickly if you have something that has an Edge driver in it is to go into the device. Here's a device I have. I know this one's not on an Edge driver, and here's how I can tell. Up in the details, I press those 3 dots. If it doesn't say driver here, it is not currently being used with the Edge drivers. Today, what you have to do in order to get something like this working with an Edge driver is you have to take it out of the Samsung SmartThings app and then you put it back in. So here I have the IKEA remote control. That's this one. It has 5 buttons on it, and I was testing the other day, so all my automations are blown away on this device. We can see it's still working, it's still connected here, so I'm not worried about this not working. But the first thing you're going to want to do with any device you're going to connect is to make sure, number 1, that it is in a working state, and number 2, you want to come in here and look at what actions you're taking with the device. You want to look at the routines that it's included in, and you may want to look at the history to see if it's something that is being used quite often. The other thing that you'll want to do is to head into automations, and you'll want to look into scenes. Now this is a button, so it's not really going to be in any scenes, but we've already checked the routines, and we also have smart apps. So in a lot of cases, I think a lot of you will be using smart lighting as a smart app, and that means you'll want to check to make sure that you're not using this button in there before you go and remove it. So you want to take note of everything you're doing, because you're not doing a direct replacement here, you're doing a removal and then a reintroduction of the device. The first thing you're going to want to do with most of these devices is to remove them. Once you go into the device details, head up to Edit and then hit Remove Device. Many Z-Wave devices will have a bit of a different pattern, so you may have to do a Z-Wave exclude process, which means going to your SmartThings hub and then actually going through the proper process for a Z-Wave device. But for things like Zigbee devices like this, it's a lot easier. What I'm doing now is I'm just going to hit scan for nearby devices, and what IKEA tells us with this one is you press this link button 4 times and then it should reconnect. To get this actually to pair in the end, I held this button for a long time, and then once I thought I'd held it for about 20 seconds, then I pressed it 4 times and it actually showed up. Now I also did this at the same time. So now I have 2 devices that have come in at the same time, and I can head to my devices page and we can have a look. So here's my IKEA remote control. I'm going to head into that, and now you can see that it has a driver associated with it. If we had a different one that we wanted to use, here's where you can select a different one. So if you downloaded a custom driver, you installed a custom one, this is your opportunity to switch over to use that now. This is how you can go and get different capabilities out of your devices. Now we would go back in, we would refill in what we want to have happen as we're pressing the device or holding the different buttons on the device, and we can add it to routines, plus we can see the history build on these devices. The same thing holds true for our multi-purpose sensor, which is using, again, a default Edge driver. Here it is, and what's really impressed me, obviously, with local control is just how fast these are updating. So this is quite a bit of movement, and you can see how quick the contact sensor changes are being reported to the app. So all of this local connectivity, very positive for your smart home setup. As we move into automations, there's a few ways that you can get local automations. Once you've created a routine, well, what you're going to see in some instances is that icon right there. That's what tells you you have a local automation going on. If you don't see it, and you can see not a lot of my automations at the moment have that little check mark in the house, if you don't see that, it's not local. And when you go into an automation, you can see this little note at the bottom that says this routine runs on your hub instead of the cloud. In order to create a routine that is running locally, you have to start with those components, and there's certain conditions that will run locally and certain conditions that will not run locally. On this chart, there's a few, or on this list, there's a few. Any time period, including sunrise and sunset, now runs locally on this. The device status, this is what we've changed by getting these paired in with Edge drivers or just any other local device. So when I choose the multi-purpose sensor, everything on here, because it's using the Edge driver, all of this should be local, but there's a few things that right now might turn into a non-local automation. So I'll give you an example. The battery equal or above 90%, I'm going to hit that and I'm going to hit done. And then here, if I was to control a device, there are some lights that I have that are treated locally. I'll say the closet room light. Now when I hit save on this, it's down at the bottom of my list, and you can see it is not locally run, and that's because of the condition that we added here. So I'm going to just change the battery to matches right now, and then I'm going to hit save. and there's that difference showing up. So you can play with the different conditions, but here's a pretty good list of the conditions that you'll see that work locally today. Things like this, equal or above or equal or below, those are expected to be usable in the future in local automation. So don't treat this as a final list, but do treat it as a today. Here's my vibration detected. And I think what we're seeing is that the basic uses are staying local with these kinds of devices. So let's go to temperature. We're going to hit 20 degrees, hit save. And you can see that staying local, but when we go to do a comparison, equal or above, I'm going to hit save again. So you can see those comparative statements in our automations are not running locally just yet. Moving into the actions side of things, of course, devices are kind of the same where some of those are local. To try and notify someone runs in the cloud. Same with scenes and changing the security mode. All of those are non-local actions. Of course, we do have many more actions that can be run locally or components of the device control that can be. There is another way to get local automations, and this is within the Smart Apps component. There's a few smart apps that you can use, and the biggest example is smart lighting. This whole smart application can be done locally on your SmartThings hub. So you just choose the devices you'd like to use, and as long as you're choosing devices that are locally controlled, so again, I'll choose that closet room light, and you're choosing the trigger devices being a local device that we've just included with those edge drivers or otherwise, then you will have a local automation. So you can see this one, it's the same automation that I really just set up in routines. Whenever this goes opened or closed with my specific new sensor that I just got in the Edge driver program, that's going to be an automation that runs locally. Let's do some testing with locally controlled products versus non-locally controlled products. This is on the Edge driver program. We've seen that going on, and what I have is basically open and close two automations that will, as this opens and closes, this will change. So here we go. And you can see there's a good delay. There's going to be some differences in terms of, the overall time between me closing and opening this to getting that bulb to react. But there's definitely a significant delay, and it's not like this isn't something that could be locally connected. This is a Z-Wave bulb, and it's from Innovelli. It's part of their Illumin series. So I did have to factory reset. I know you can't see that very well, but I had to factory reset that bulb, and now I have it brought back into SmartThings. So it's down at the bottom of this list. It's a new Illumin light. So there, I've brought it down to a reasonable dimmer temperature here, and I've also chosen the color that I'd like to use with it. But now we see that we have a driver for this. So it's now a local device. It's using the Z-Wave bulb driver. And now let's try it out with the automation. So now we have two local automations. Let's see how this performs. So there you go. You can see a much faster way through these automations. And that's even with a Z-Wave bulb. And I think it's important to remember that, Z-Wave has a little bit of latency in it inherently. So now I have this Linkind bulb that I just factory reset, and it's just a Zigbee bulb. So it came in using the Zigbee switch driver. That's what's used on Zigbee. And I think things are pretty quick now in terms of responsiveness. So what I did is I added that one to these two automations that we had going with this, and now let's see the speed. You can see that this bulb is a lot faster, even though this is a local automation running. With that one, You can almost, wow. Look at how fast that's going. This one I can almost do in real time. Look at that. It's gotta wait for this. So let's test that out actually. Let's take this Illumin one out, and now I should be able to go just about as quick as I'd like. Look at how fast that is. That is ridiculous. That's the power of a local automation. So I've added a new bulb. You can see that both of my automations have gone non-local. Now, what we should see is this one still responds very quickly, but this one takes a little extra time. And if you were going to try and have this automation trigger about 100 times, it's actually waiting for the response back from that bulb. So it doesn't work as well when you've included a non-local device in your automation. So you can see just a little bit of a delay here. The SwitchBot bulb is actually doing really well. But there's definitely still a difference, and if I start to go really quickly, we're having to wait for that other bulb. Let me try and go quicker. See, now you start to get some of the delays in there. But still, really impressed with the performance of that, even though it is a cloud-based bulb. You might be wondering, do things change based on the order? Let's find out. So I've put this locally controlled bulb under, when I close this, it's the second execution spot. So now when I go back together, this is the second execution spot. We'll see if it waits for this. See that? This one goes off first because it's in the first execution position. But when I close it, you can see this one's taking a little extra time. Oh, now it's back to normal. So after a couple of runs, really interesting that I can see sometimes because it's positioned second as a locally connected device, it's actually sometimes ending up behind this. If you're here in the video, then I know you're a pretty heavy user of SmartThings, and we talked a lot about moving automations to local execution, but that isn't everything when we talk about reliability of your smart home. And that's why this video that's up on screen is so important, because it shows you how to improve the reliability of SmartThings in many ways. So go check that out, and I promise I'll give you tons of tools for maintaining this home of yours. Otherwise, thanks for watching today, and of course, don't hate, automate.